It has changed in terms of how it's structured nowadays, because the dominant monetization strategies, advertising, commercial sites don't want to use external links, so we end up with a whole bunch of knowledge silos. And what that means is if you want to find something out, then you need to go to the search, or you often find things incidentally with social media feeds. But we're not doing so much of that where you go to one page and then you hit a link and end up going to another page and then go to another page and then 3 hours later you realize. So what this means is we're actually, with these knowledge silos, we have a lack of context on the internet. And that lack of context means that you have to rely on search. But here's the problem with search. How much of the internet do you all think that Google indexes? What percentage of the internet? 99. What percentage of the internet does Google index? 40, 15? Do you agree with them or have another number? Give me a number. Doesn't matter. No wrong answer. Just guess. Okay, well, go ahead and give us the answer then. No, it's opposite of that. It's 0.03%. So 1 in 3,000 pages. So basically, the way that we find things is going to something that is indexing about 3 drops in a bucket. So that's the problem. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. Basically, if Google can make $100 billion off 0.3% of the internet, there's a $10 trillion economy that's just waiting to happen. And guess what? It's not on the web page, it's over the web page. We call it the overweb. And the way we think about it, in the future, the page source, which is controlled right now by the page author, determines the entire internet experience. In the future, the page source is simply going to be the contextual footprint for intertwined worlds of information, interactions, transactions, and experiences that emanate from content elements on the page. So anybody will be able to put a link on a web page, or put a comment on a web page, or put a collaboration request. There's a lot of money that's to be made from what can happen on top of a web page. The web page becomes a contextual footprint. It's just the jumping off point for your experience, your digital experience. And like I said, $10 trillion. So our solution, what we're doing, we're not going to build the whole overweb. We're building a foundational element of that, and that is bridges. Like the web has links, social media has friends or connections, your mind has synapses that connect the neurons. The overweb has bridges which connect a piece of information on one page to a piece of information on another page and gives it a semantic relationship. So what I'm saying is that you can connect a paragraph to an image, to a slice of a video, to a tweet, and all of these relationships can have a relationship. So they could be supporting or conflicting. And the notion is so we're going to incentivize the crowd to build a whole bunch of bridges, all the stuff that they find on search and don't have any good thing to do with right now. What can you do? Oh, go build a bridge from a piece of content to that new piece of content and give it a relationship. Now, when we have a lot of these bridges created in any topic area, really interesting thing happens. Discovery of information becomes almost instantaneous. So we track your attention because it's a browser overlay. We track your attention, and if there's something active near your attention, it lights up, so you see that something's there. Then you move your attention and rest it on one of those items, and it brings up all the bridges that are related to that particular item on the page. So in a sense, your search is just by moving your attention. As you move your attention, you see all the different options of where you can go next. You can then look at it and say, oh, okay, I want to see the conflicting information. I want to see the supporting information. I want to see the sourcing information. all that information creates a 360-degree context. And so there's like I said, I don't want to take up any more time, but I want to say that there's a $10 trillion opportunity that's happening on top of the web page. Well, one of the things that we're most proud of, we won a Next Generation Internet Award from the EU. And in fact, we were the only non-European company to win this. And they're recognizing that we are a technology, culture disruptor. So super exciting. We're going to YC tonight. We're going to be participating in the hackathon. We're going to be dropping a new piece of code this weekend. And we're super excited about that. Thank you for having me. Picking up checks. And picking up checks. Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. Next up, we will have blockchain job market forecast. Please, may all the speakers please come up. Thank again for K-Chain and Hashgraph, Outmarket, Rubix. Take a seat. Janice will moderate the panel, so if you guys are interested in about the job market and forecast, please stay and listen. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited about this discussion. I think we've got some really great people here who could share a lot of ideas. I first want to start out and say that we have 3 objectives, which we hope that we're able to achieve with this discussion. One is to sort of clarify where the blockchain opportunities are, what specifically are they, and give you some advice on where the training is. I think that, for example, the DIN is here, so I know that that's where I went for a lot of the classes to learn more about blockchain. And thirdly, where you can find those job opportunities. We want to be able to clarify that for you as well, too. So to start off, I think it would be a good idea for us to introduce ourselves and also talk about how we sort of began our interest in blockchain, sort of what triggered that. And to introduce myself, my name is Janice Williams Oliver. I do marketing for MassMutual, which is a financial services company. And a very good friend of mine, and some of you may know him by the name of Toby Morning, he gave me a free ticket to a blockchain conference about a year ago in San Francisco, and that really piqued my interest. I love the fact that what really turned me on, I should say, is the fact that you're able to track assets, for example. De Beers has a blockchain, and De Beers is able to track where diamonds come from. And so that was one specific use case that really sort of was a huge interest of mine. So if we want to start down where Kyle is, Kyle can kind of tell us who he is and how he got started.
Hi, everyone. Kyle here. Yeah, so I guess the first time I heard about blockchain was in 2012, 2013. I was interning down at Silicon Valley's Plug and Play Tech Center. Yeah. So I did some marketing work with them, and my manager at the time was really into blockchain. He was having Bitcoin meetups there. I think some of the first Bitcoin meetups in the Bay Area. And yeah, he would just host these meetups every Wednesday night, 6 p.m. A lot of people would come in for them. It was really interesting. I told my roommate about it at Stanford. He invested, made a bunch of money, dropped out, never heard from him again. Yeah, and that was the first time I heard about Bitcoin. So yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm excuse me, Norman Weeks. I have a background in banking, commercial lending, and about 2 years or so ago, it might be 3 at this point, I heard about blockchain, started reading up on it and watching videos on it. And what really drew me to blockchain was the fact that, and Bitcoin in particular, I'm more of a blockchain enthusiast. I understand the functionality and necessity of Bitcoin, but the fact that you would be able to transact business without the need of a government or a bank was something I found very compelling. And I also, as a black person, found the opportunity or a chance to be able to conduct business without a government or a bank, which have traditionally not been kind to our people, something very powerful. And I thought it was something that our whole diaspora should know about, and any people who are not empowered should know about, because it can empower you. It can empower you to lose money, but it can empower you to have creative ideas. And I like to see, and what I'm interested in is blockchain applications that solve social problems or make the lives of everyday people better. So that's how I got interested in it. You know, I bought a little Bitcoin. I watched it go up and down. I didn't get it too excited. But at some point, you know, I think it will be a currency that most of the new generation that's younger now will be using going forward.
My name is Kevin Echols. I am the founder of an organization called the Social Engineering Project, which basically came out of going to a conference one day put on by the San Francisco Foundation, Policy Link, and USC. They did a study and they showed what the Bay Area would look like 20 years from now with the lack of diversity in tech. And so I decided that I was going to do something in that space in order to fix this problem. So I create pipeline programs for young people. I get young people interested in math, science, chemistry, physics, and engineering. And the Social Engineering Project has been around for 3 years, and a buddy of mine from high school works for Microsoft in the Azure group, and he's the first person who introduced me to Bitcoin and blockchain. And so his goal really was to get more black people to want to come to Seattle and hopefully work at Microsoft. But I just was compelled to find out on Facebook that he was always going to Lagos and Europe and all over the world, basically helping local communities create blockchain so that they could do business in these areas. And so that's what kind of got me interested in that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Hi, my name is Anki Kwan. I'm a lawyer and I own a law firm called Vanguardium Legal. And we started because we wanted to fill the needs in the blockchain space. But before I started my firm, I was at a public interest law firm, and I led the public interest group, specifically working with founders and entrepreneurs. And our focus was to help these businesses raise money, and we did that by using securities laws. If you're not familiar, whenever you raise money, you have to be conscientious about securities laws. So we helped businesses navigate those laws. And by the time that ICOs got really popular in 2017, I started getting lots of questions about whether securities laws apply to ICOs. And then we found out that even after companies raised money, they still had a lot of legal needs. So we just started our firm in order to meet those needs.
Thank you. So again, this panel discussion is titled Jobs in the Blockchain Space. And so I thought that it would be a good idea to just sort of let's just quantify what we're specifically talking about in terms of jobs. So somebody had done an analysis on Glassdoor, and they found, looking at the positions that have blockchain in the title, that there are 5,700 positions, blockchain jobs, and half of those are in the United States. That's a lot of positions. And so the two positions that were most common was blockchain engineer and blockchain developer. And what was also surprising is that a lot of those positions were not necessarily at the cryptocurrency companies or startups, but were at major companies like Oracle or Microsoft or IBM, for example. So with that said, I I think this is a good time for us to talk more in depth about the regulatory environment in blockchain and sort of how it's evolved throughout the last couple of years and where it is now. Unki, if you could sort of comment about that.
Oh, what specifically did you want me to comment on?
If you want to talk about the ICO and STO
Yeah, sure.
and what sort of is happening from a regulatory standpoint.
Okay. So in 2017, ICOs became really popular. ICOs stand for Initial Coin Offering, and this is basically when blockchain companies create their own currency and they sell this currency to raise money. In 2017, there was some thought that if you were doing an ICO, then you didn't have to comply with securities laws, but the SEC came down in, it was late July of 2017, and they issued something called the Dow Report, and in this report, the SEC basically warned the industry, if you're offering and selling securities, no matter what form it's in, then you do have to comply with the securities laws. So in 2017, the SEC didn't take any major enforcement actions against any companies. It was just a year where they were warning people. But in 2018, that changed, and they took enforcement actions against many companies, regardless of whether they acted in bad faith or not. And that caused companies to go in the way of an STO, which is basically the same as an ICO, except instead of claiming that you're not a security, you're saying, okay, the securities laws do apply to me, so I'm going to try to comply with those laws. And this year, it seems like the SEC is providing more clarification. So that's the stage that we're at now. I feel like their message is still pretty consistent from 2017, but they're giving more guidance to the industry about what they have to actually do to comply with the law.
And are you seeing ICOs? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing more of them or less of them this year as a result?
I think this year it's less, but in 2018 there were actually more ICOs in terms of numbers, but companies were raising less money. So each ICO was raising a smaller amount of money, but there were more ICOs.
Okay. And one of the reasons why I thought it was a good idea for us to mention ICOs and STOs is because there have been positions created to support that activity. And so, Kyle, I believe that you have held some positions like that. And if you could comment on that and also comment a little bit about how you became knowledgeable when you started those positions.
Yeah, I guess I was pretty lucky in that the first token project that I worked on, they had already done their ICO. It was two friends of mine who were my year at Stanford, and they'd raised about 12 million in Ethereum in July of 2017. So by like December, that was like $110 million. And yeah, I mean, these guys were like my year. They knew Tim Draper. They kind of just were ahead of the curve in terms of figuring out how to do a token offering. And yeah, once they'd raised that money, they were pretty active in hiring engineers, and I was brought on as a researcher. So pretty much my job was writing papers and doing research about the industry and publishing on blogs, like what was going on through the fall of the rise and the hype of Bitcoin and into the next year. Sorry, I want to get back to your question.
Right. So you've had positions, though, and you're sort of talking about that now, that have supported ICOs and STOs. And so you've talked about how you've written the white papers, so you've done the research, for example. But I also know that you've probably served in a marketing capacity, too. So you've been creating content, correct?
Yeah.
Where were you placing some of that content?
Pretty much any form of social media we could. We use Medium a lot for the written content. We'd post videos on YouTube that were like educational films that help people understand, what Bitcoin is, how blockchain works, 101 videos kind of explaining those things. Basically just informing people about what's going on in the industry was pretty important because, people really want information. They want to know what's, going on, how to understand this stuff. And we found that to be a really good way to get people interested in our project. So I mean, a combination of that and just keeping people informed on Telegram and forms of like community management. Like, I think once you do an ICO or an STO, there's a huge difference in how you have to relate to your investors. And when you do a project like that, you're basically crowdfunding. So you're then accountable to all of these people. You suddenly become a public company like overnight, and you're accountable to all these people who've given their money to you. So one of the huge challenges in that is that keeping an open line of communication on social media or whatever it is with these people to be like, okay, here's what we're working on, you know, this is the state of the project. They're basically shareholders at that point in time. So yeah, once you have an STO or an ICO and your project is no longer private, it's public, it completely changes the dynamic of how you relate to your customers.
And one of the things you mentioned is Medium, and I know that one of the things we wanted to sort of talk or introduce is where you can go to learn, and Medium is a really great resource. They've got a number of different articles that are blockchain and cryptocurrency related, so that's just a suggestion. Norm, you had a position with a foreign company in the Ukraine, and you were doing business development, and I was sort of curious if you could talk about what does business development look like in the blockchain industry? What exactly?
Sure, I was there for just a few months. I'm the guy who shows up to the party and the party's over. And I say to myself, this was a really good party. Well, that's what my experience was like, because we were going after ICOs. They were Ukrainian-based, that's where developers and management were, but they were incorporated here in the States. So I was helping to represent their Silicon Valley presence. I was actually recruited to that company after sitting on a panel like this. And your question was my experience?
Yeah, so I think some people would be wondering, and we've talked, what does business, is it similar to being in a tech space as far as what business development looks like?
Sure.
How were you measured in terms of success? Were they clear on that?
Well, yeah, if you were able to attract and bring a successful ICO to market. When I joined, the SEC was in, I don't want to say they were in the process of killing a market. They were regulating the market. They were doing what they probably should have done much earlier. And what that led to is a lot of downturn in activity. It led to a lot more investor skepticism, which made it harder to raise funds. So what it looks like any other business development program. You've got to identify and qualify your prospects. And in that regard, that meant you had to find people who had anywhere to use our marketing and business development services and white paper services and building out the protocol for your coin. That meant anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 that you'd have to have. And then they'd have to have probably another 80 grand for legal and compliance. So you had to qualify these people. And whereas everyone had a coin, or everyone had an idea for a coin, not everyone had the money to do it. And what I found is there were a lot of companies who had great ideas but no money, or they had a team that, so one of the things in terms of information that I learned actually from an online course from Udemy is how to qualify an ICO. And one of the things you do is you look at the team, you look at the content they're putting out, you look at the whether or not what the white paper says. If the white paper doesn't tell you what they're going to do with the money after you give it to them, that's a big red flag. And many white papers didn't address that. It was just like there's an old joke about I'm gonna buy a boat, So we'd have to sift through the weeds to identify the best ones and introduce them to our marketing people and our technical people to build their product if it made sense, and if we thought it was something that we could bring them through a round of fundraising through investors and road shows, et cetera, to help raise money. So that was my experience. It was a tough market, like I say. I was happy to be in it because I'm a blockchain enthusiast and I learned a ton. But it was a cautionary tale. as this whole industry is. You know, we're at the point where dial-up was, I would say, in the internet, at this blockchain, ICO, all that stuff. And in fact, I'd love to hear your opinion on, if you had a chance to look at the latest SEC. They put out something about, I don't know what they call it, no action. Yeah, no action. Because when I saw what they required the company to do, it seemed very restrictive, but it seemed reasonable. Right. So I'd love to hear your comment about that.
I think you did a video on that, didn't you?
I did a video.
I saw it on LinkedIn. Yes, yes. So please comment.
Yeah, so briefly, the SEC, they submitted their first no action letter to a company that wanted to do an ICO. And this company, so basically what a no action letter is, it's a letter from the SEC saying that if you do the things that you're asking us whether you can do in your request for a no action letter, then you can do that and we won't take any enforcement action against you. This company, they were fully operational, and they basically told the SEC, we want to sell tokens, and once we sell these tokens, the buyers can immediately exchange these tokens for services on our platform. So the SEC said, okay, as long as they can't derive any value from these tokens. So basically, the SEC is saying that if you want to sell gift cards for your company, then that's okay. But if you want to generate any value from those tokens, then that's probably not okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things that I mentioned is how large companies are the ones that are that have the blockchain positions now. And I think Norm Kevin would love for you to talk more about the kinds of conversations you've been having with your Microsoft contact, if you can go in a little more detail about the kinds of projects that he's been working on, and that would be really great.
Well, as I mentioned, and his name is Michael Glaros, you guys can find him on LinkedIn, but I was asking him, what can I do from a pipeline perspective of how I can prepare young people and some young adults, if I come across them, to be able to enter the field of blockchain. A lot of times it's only talking about it from the engineering side, but there are so many different aspects of going in the industry. So he had mentioned that from an enterprise level, he thinks that that's where the next step of where blockchain needs to go. There's not enough collaboration worldwide regarding it, and it's moving very slowly. He also mentioned that people needing to develop skills in business process design and engineering analysis assessment. And the way he described that was, oftentimes you're having big problems that people with only technological backgrounds are trying to fix, but there's so many other skills that are necessary to get collaboration, partnerships, communication skills, understanding banking institutions, and understanding how to make those understandable on a human level. So he goes to various countries throughout Africa and works with local governments on how to buy and trade things like selling goats and milk and the supply chain of their businesses, and being able to capture that using blockchain to allow people to communicate and buy services on their phones, et cetera, which has never really been done before. So it's allowing the local farmer there to be able to compete in a market where they would normally not be able to compete in. So it's pretty revolutionary and amazing stuff that's happening. And so the reason why I'm involved in it is I want to make sure that we prepare our youth to be able to get into that, because by the time they get there, the industry will change, but some fundamentals won't.
Thank you. Does anyone have any, because you mentioned social impact projects, and so does anyone have any thoughts on any social impact use cases that they'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I remember one statistic that stood out is that PayPal is only in, I think, 28 countries globally right now. Mm-hmm. So that leaves out over 100 countries around the world that don't have access to mobile banking. And I think that's something that would be a huge use case for blockchain to be able to solve, is, bringing banking to places in Africa where, if somebody has a phone that's cheaper, more accessible, and JP Morgan's not willing to go there, then they can get banking off of, their cellular device. And that would definitely change the economic playing field and definitely help, bring a lot of people out of poverty,
And I've also heard that Uber and companies like that are also exploring blockchain in these countries to be able to, as taxi services are getting more competitive and there's fraud and there's a lot of other fake currencies, it's harder for people to trust whose car to get into and that kind of stuff. So to be able to use blockchain and allow people to get, normal services that we take for granted here in the United States, I think is, a huge impact.
Those are two really good use cases. Anybody else have anything thoughts?
Yeah, so worldwide, I think there's more applications for social good and solving social problems than what we're seeing here in the States. Technology, at least in my opinion and my observation, is always focused on generating money and profit, and that's where the talent goes. That's where the resources go. But the UN is doing something practical in terms of how they're feeding refugees. They've put the vouchers on a blockchain. The people are identified by an eye scan, and that's how they're being tracked. That's how the ledger works in terms of the vouchers that they get in refugee camps. And what that's done is eliminate a lot of costs, because when they were doing that the other way, there were transfers that were involved. And anytime there's a transfer involved, there's a bank involved. And anytime there's a bank involved, you're going to pay some money. There was also a lot of corruption going on. Imagine if you had a paper voucher or card voucher, whatever it might be, you were subject to blackmail or theft or whatever it might be. So that's one application I think is working rather well. There's an initiative between, I think, Microsoft, and I can't remember the 2 or 3 other companies, but Hyperledger's involved. Yes. They want to, there's 1.1 billion people who don't have identifications
Yes.
throughout the world, and if you don't have an ID.
And that helps with refugees as well, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I believe there's an initiative that they're putting together to try to resolve that and solve that problem, and that'll certainly empower folks who currently don't have any form or any track of ID. And even in our black community, many of us don't know, our grandmothers or great-grandmothers, we don't know where the exact day we were born or where we were born, that kind of thing. And then there was another there's a company in UK called Provenance. And what they're doing is they're tracking different types of consumer products, be it food, clothing. You mentioned diamonds, they're not doing that, but that's another example of it. People want to know where their stuff comes from and who made it, and whether or not slave labor was involved, or whether it was really organic, or whether it was something that is helping or hurting the environment. And what they're doing is they're tracking through the supply chain certain products so that you as a consumer can go on, if you're at a restaurant, and say, hey, where did this fish come from? You can go online and see, you can track the supply chain of it. And what companies are doing who are playing by the rules and doing things that are good for the environment, they're advertising that. And they're saying to their consumers, hey, look, this is what we do, and we can verify this is what we do. It means you should maybe pay a premium for it because we're doing the right thing. So there's all kind of, the final one is, not final one, but the other one is tracking land registry.
Yes, and there are countries that are doing that.
So in 2010, Haiti lost, in the earthquake, all the records were destroyed. Yeah. Well, now what? Guess what? The guy with the biggest gun now owns your land. If you can put those records in a blockchain you can access it digitally, then you won't have this land use or land being able to identify that you own the land. You won't have that problem, and it goes beyond your records being destroyed in an earthquake. It comes down to corruption and just people and countries taking your stuff. So
Yes,
there's
you are
some
right.
instances for you there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be particularly helpful in some of the countries that are underdeveloped, for example, to be able to put those records on a blockchain. Yes, I agree with you. And so I think this is now a good time for us to talk about what we think is going to, what opportunities we see in the future. Anki, when we talked on the phone, you had 3 areas that you sort of talked to. I was wondering if you could, talk to that and go in a little bit of detail.
Oh.
Yeah, so the 3 areas that I see developing in blockchain based on my experience as a lawyer comes down to records, compliance, and legal technology. In terms of records, I've been seeing laws passed in many states, including our own, that allow corporate records to be kept on the blockchain. And I think that that means 2 things. One is that it'll make STOs possible, and 2, it'll make the ability to keep records of shareholders more efficient. Because right now there are these entities called transfer agents, and what they do is they keep track of who owns what in the company, and it's not very efficient, but with blockchain tech, it's pretty much automatic, so it will make a transfer agent's job easier. But the thing is, right now, the technology isn't there, so doing an STO is extremely expensive, so that technology needs to be developed. So I think there's a huge opportunity there to develop that technology.
You mentioned 2 other areas, too.
Yeah, so for compliance, because blockchain, it touches on so many regulatory areas, it's really important to figure out which regulatory area applies to you before you start your blockchain company, and ensure that you continue to comply as you run the company. Because if you don't comply, your company can shut down before you pick up any steam. So I think there's a lot of room for lawyers to create the strategy, but for compliance people to actually execute on that strategy. And that also helps your company save money, because you don't want to use a lawyer when you don't have to. You can use a compliance person instead. And if you go into compliance, it's a great way to figure out whether you want to go to law school, because you're dealing with a lot of legal things as a compliance officer. So that can help you determine if you want to take the path further and actually become an attorney. And for the third part, I think legal technology will also be big, and there will be a lot of jobs there, because the blockchain can make managing legal documents and contracts more efficient, and it can make the execution of these documents more efficient. And because of this, we also need lawyers to help develop the technology, as well as developers to do so as well.
Do you think a lawyer is going to have to become a developer as well, too? Because, you have these smart contracts, and so what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think that would be necessary. I think that the technology will get to a point where anyone can use it, regardless of whether you have a legal education or not. I think that in order for the technology to really work, it should be seamless, and we shouldn't really have to think about it too much in order to use it.
And from a training standpoint, where do you recommend? I mean, we talked about Berkeley having a program. You have any suggestions? How to get up to speed?
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of great resources if you want to learn about blockchain tech. For example, the Den is one great resource. They have a lot of educational sources, and they have great lectures, so that's a great starting point. I also find that Twitter is a good place to keep up to date on news, because blockchain changes so quickly that you kind of have to keep up to date, because you really don't know what's going on from one day to the next. LinkedIn is a good resource. And I think that if you're in school, there are lots of schools with clubs. Like, for example, you said Berkeley has a blockchain club. Stanford has something called Code X. And I don't know about other schools, but I'm sure that there are clubs in schools where you can learn about this stuff. if you're interested in development, I think taking computer science courses at City College or some kind of community college is a good place to start. But I'm sure the other panelists have ideas as well.
Okay. Well, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I did want to close with Kyle, because you have had a number of jobs, and so you started out kind of early, 2017. It sounds like while you were in undergrad. So where do you see the opportunities in the future? Where do you see the industry going?
I'd say the best place to try and find opportunities is probably at conferences like this and just networking, going to events or going to some of the incubators. There's like 3 incubators in the city. There's Node, there's Starfish Mission, there's one other one. But yeah, just basically being in the space and knowing people is probably the best way to go about doing it. Pretty much all the opportunities I got last year were from, referrals for people that I met and that knew I was in the space. And yeah, that's definitely my best piece of advice.
Okay. Well, I want to thank my panelists for what I think was a really interesting and insightful discussion. I don't even know if we have any time for questions. I don't think so. So thank you. Thank you for being a great audience.
Thank you. We're going to have our regulation panel soon, in a bit. Just a reminder that there is food at 5 o'clock, so there should be food already. So upstairs, there's some food. Maybe we're going to take a little bit break before we come back to the regulation panel. So I'm really, really excited about this as a lawyer and also as a member of helping make legislation both in California and Georgia. And just coming back from the World Bank and Intermonetary Fund just this week. It's just kind of exciting to hear the speakers talking about regulation. So you want to go ahead, introduce?
Sure. Great to be here. So I'm Radhika Iyengar-Emmons. I'm founding partner of Star Chain Ventures and focused on enterprise blockchain and foundational protocols and also doing social good with that. So those are kind of the three main themes. I guess I'm also interested in the regulatory aspect because in many cases, like in healthcare, where I spend most of my time working, I see regulation as being a driver for adoption. Happy to go into that a little bit later in the panel, but I'd like all of my panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Anki Kwan. I have a law firm named Vanguardian Legal, and we actually started to meet the needs of blockchain companies.
Hi, I'm Ali Medina. I'm the director of the Blockchain Advocacy Coalition. We work to educate policymakers and promote positive blockchain regulation here in California and a little bit of federal work as well.
Good evening. My name is Michelle James. I'm in charge of the engineering function at a startup called Ninth Gear Technologies. So I'm more on the practical application side and less on the policy and the philosophy.
So I'm especially intrigued by what you do, Ali, on the regulation side. I'd like to open up sort of a broader question, which is a lot of people look at regulation as somewhat of a dampening, issue. You might curtail innovation. We certainly have seen that on the ICO side with the regulatory climate not being so favorable to ICOs and so on. And the climate's sort of shifting because there's many different aspects on that side. I don't know if we want to cover that at all in this conversation. I want to keep it a little bit open-ended. But what I'd like to talk about is how regulation can shape the conversation in a positive way, because I think that we don't necessarily want the wild, wild west either. And so I look at regulation and policy as a way of shaping a conversation, setting ground rules of engagement, if you will. You might not agree with those ground rules of engagement, but that's kind of how I perceive it. So I thought I'd start with you, Ali, and then we can maybe include Anki and Michelle as well.
Yeah, I really agree that regulation can help the markets as much as it can hurt them. JP Morgan did a great study where they showed that the number one factor in where a blockchain or cryptocurrency company chose to locate was actually clarity in regulations, not laxity. They're not looking just for the tax breaks. They're looking just to know what the deal is. And that is the main problem in the United States, right? We have 4 different definitions of virtual currency at a federal level. You've got blue sky provisions, so states can then layer on individual securities and laws underneath each of those and money transmitter requirements. And so it can cost up to $22 million for a virtual currency kind of company to become fully compliant in all 50 states and with the federal government. That prohibits innovation. There's some federal bills that are aimed at sort of precluding what's happening at the state level, so it's a lot simpler. The Token Taxonomy Act has been reintroduced recently. But I think there's a lot we can do in individual states as well, and especially California, since we are the 5th largest economy in the world, and what we do, frankly, matters to the United States. So what we're trying to do is educate policymakers here and push forward a better framework of policy to help stem the fact that we've lost about 50% of our market share in California of this industry since 2012. If you track that against other tech industries, obviously it's an aberration. This is weird, and this is because we haven't done any regulation until last year when the first 2 blockchain bills passed. So I think it absolutely can be a driver to help keep the industry here as long as we create a clear framework of rules with the industry engaged.
Yeah, I think that the wild, wild west didn't really work because I think that the ICOs that did raise money when there were supposedly no regulations, over 90% of those failed. But in 2018, even though the price of crypto wasn't very high and it dropped a lot, but I think that in that year, I think that companies were actually starting to do the work and developing actual technology that does work and isn't based on something that's completely speculative.
So I'll ask a little bit more specific of a question. I mean, the SEC came out recently with the first no action letter. And what I thought was notable is the fact that in order to have that, I guess, first bestowed upon them, the company had to have a full network already in place, fully deployed, and then the use of the token itself had to be strictly within the network itself, meaning it wasn't there to, you know, be a speculative unit. It wasn't there to generate any income so that the product could be produced. So I thought I might ask experts here on the panel in terms of what you thought were the clear messages that came out of that, and what can companies take away from that going forward?
Well, I think one clear message that came out of that was if you're selling tokens and you want to say that your token isn't a security, you better make sure that your buyers can't profit from it in any way whatsoever. And I think another thing is, I think they put a lot of safeguards on what can't be done so that companies are legitimately selling their tokens in exchange for services or goods, and not as a way to speculate on the price of tokens.
I am not a securities lawyer. I did read the letter. And I think Crypto Twitter really summed it up best with, why is this company even using blockchain? Like, it does not seem to be matter for their model at all. No one would have thought that was a security. I don't think it gave like a wide swath of the market a sigh of relief of, oh, clearly if we do this, then we'll be safe. I mean, it's like, no, in this one particular instance where obviously this definitely wasn't a security, it's not a security. I'm not super excited about it.
Yeah. I too, I'm not a securities person, so I can't pontificate as well as you can on this. We do have, in our industry, we're trying to change the way foreign exchange currency is traded, and there's a lot of regulation, if you will, on using anti-money laundering and the KYC, know your customer piece. But it's not securities related necessarily, so.
Yeah, and to add to that, I don't think anyone's really excited, because I was telling people, like, if you want to raise tokens and sell them as gift cards, you can do that, but no one ever took me up on that offer.
Well, I mean, the clear takeaways that I had from that, and I'm not a securities lawyer either, but the clear takeaways that I had was that, A, the network had to be built out. So you're not raising, using the token and the proceeds of a token sale to actually build product and to build a network. The network's already in place. The second is that the use of the token is strictly within the network itself, and it's not like it's something that is going to be traded, so it's not a security. So I think that those were some of those really clear takeaways that I had. And if there's no real value for the token on an exchange or anything, it's really purely a utility value. It's being used within the network to provide access to whatever that token is supposed to be. It's almost like a loyalty point, if in a way, because that loyalty point with an airline is only as good as that network of airline plus maybe partners, et cetera. But it's not really, there has no utility value, there's no monetary value, there's no currency value associated with that token. So that's kind of the takeaway that I had. I wanted to switch the conversation a little bit in areas that I work in, which is in industry, which is when you have a regulated industry, for example, in finance, or on the healthcare side, for example, there's some really clear use cases of regulation that actually shapes that conversation, like I mentioned earlier, around the use of blockchain, if you will. So in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, there is the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, which was created in 2013, and there was a 10-year timeline to say you had to be able to track and trace all of the provenance of prescription drugs all the way back to manufacturer. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of big problems with counterfeit drugs. That's like a $200 billion problem globally. So when you look at a regulation that is basically saying, hey, all of you pharmaceutical companies have to be compliant with this, and by the way, the first milestone of this track and trace or serialization mechanism has to be in place by November of this year, 2019, there's a lot of fire under the feet that suddenly sprouts up because the pharmaceutical companies have been waiting all this time, but have been trying to do it with existing systems and have failed. And so now they're looking at blockchain and saying, wow, there's a real way that we can actually establish the provenance and track and trace the entire prescription drug from manufacturer all the way through to commercial and into the hands of the consumer. This is the exact kind of transparency and trust that the blockchain has been designed for. I look at that use case and get really excited and saying, so for all those people that say regulation is a bad thing, I go, no, regulation can actually be a good thing because it's going to force people to move in industry. So there's entire consortia that are in this space, in the pharmaceutical space, looking at this and saying, we've got to be compliant and our first deadline is coming up this year, so we better really do some things fast towards that. Are you seeing any of those use cases in industry, either of you? I know, Michelle, you work in industry, so maybe we'll start with you on the finance side.
So again, what we're trying to do is, currently, today, the foreign exchange currency market, I think you know this, Radhika, it takes about 2 days to exchange currency from one large institution to another institution in a different kind of currency. And it's based on a process that was created in 1973. So all the banks globally actually use this process. And there's a lot of back-end ticking and tying and a lot of communications with internal systems on these institutions. The foreign exchange currency trades today at $5 trillion a day. So we're talking very, very large sums of money. We're not talking B2C kinds of things. We're talking B2B solution. So what we're trying to do is take away, well, first of all, what we'd like to do is have the ability to fund a trade and then execute that trade within 1 day instead of 2. And so the trail of how the money goes from bank to bank and from country to country actually just goes away. And then what ends up happening, because it is on blockchain, is about 60 to 80% of the back-end operational costs at these banks is just going to go away because you've got the immutable, distributed ledger that is highly secure and highly agreed upon, if you will.
Yeah, I've got a fun use case. This year, Blockchain Advocacy Coalition has sponsored a bill, AB 953, that will offer a solution for cannabis tax remittance. A lot of crypto companies have talked to cannabis companies. There's been quite a lot of years of effort to sort of marry the two and come up with a solution since the cannabis industry is cash heavy. They carry on 70% of the cannabis industry is unbanked. So it's hundreds of millions of dollars of cash going around in armored cars in California. It's not a good state of affairs. But the cannabis industry is getting screwed over by banks. They charge up to 10% for cash deposit fees. They're being gouged by credit card companies. They're really used to having industries just kind of pull them around because they know they don't have alternatives. So they've been a little hesitant to use cryptocurrency. This bill would allow the treasurer of the state to establish standards for what kind of wallets and coins could be used. In the bill, it requires a stable coin that's fiat collateralized, pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar. Obviously, that makes the most sense for the CDTFA to be considering accepting. And so, we're going through the committee process right now. Should this pass, it will establish a standard and a framework for cities if they wanted to replicate it, but for the state and municipal governments to begin accepting cryptocurrency, which means then there'd be a massive new market for stable coins in California, which currently does not exist because cannabis doesn't feel comfortable using it.
Yeah, so I mentioned this at the last panel, but I think that with cryptocurrency, we'll see transfer agents acting very differently. So in 2015, the SEC asked for comments on how blockchain will affect transfer agents. And basically, transfer agents keep track of who owns what shares in a corporation. But if you can do that on the blockchain, then it eliminates a lot of work that transfer agents have to do because it's automatically recorded on the blockchain, so you don't have to do that manual work of entering it into an Excel sheet. And it also eliminates a lot of mistakes because of that technology.
So changing, tracks just a little bit. There's been a lot of talk on security tokens. Because the ICO market has been so subdued, especially here in the United States, and not comparing that to some of the other jurisdictions where it is still allowed. There's been a lot of talk to look at security tokens, and I find a lot of misinformation out there because a lot of people are looking at this and saying, oh, let's all do security tokens. And people don't realize that there's specific applications of security tokens, namely that it's related to something that's collateralized, right? So it's applicable when it comes to fractionalized ownership of, say, a house or a piece of art or commercial property, et cetera. So, it opens up a lot of really great use cases. We don't have necessarily the exchanges set up yet, and I think that some are coming up online. I think Coinbase is one that's looking at that, and there may be some others in other jurisdictions in Malta, et cetera. But I'd like to get your opinions as far as where you see the security token market going and what kind of regulations we need to be thinking about when we're looking at this market.
Well, I think right now the securities tokens market, it's very young, and I think that for a lot of companies it doesn't make sense. I was talking to providers that actually code these security tokens, and the lowest estimate I got was $500,000. So unless you're raising a substantial amount of money, it really doesn't make sense to do an STO when you can use traditional methods of fundraising and still raise that money. Because at the end of the day, the objective is to raise money. You don't necessarily have to do that by using a securities token.
I see the future of the securities token market being not in the United States unless something drastic changes, frankly. Almost everyone I talk to, every business, does not want to do an STO in the US due to the regulatory uncertainty. Unless you have a lot of money involved, it's just not worth it. The legal fees are too high. Everyone's incorporating in Singapore for this reason. So unless we make a serious regulatory shift, not here. No? Okay.
Yeah, that $500,000 isn't even for legal fees. It's just to code the tokens.
Okay. That's pretty expensive. I wanted to be sensitive to your time frame. I know that you're on a tight timeline, but I wanted to open up it to any questions from any of the audience, because I think we've got some really great experts here talking about regulation. And Michelle, Jordan, I know a few of you here, Kamal. Anybody want to have a discussion, an open up discussion on this? You've got a question? Yeah. Is there?
Oh, just stand up.
There you go.
Okay. So, there's a lot of different applications. Oh, thank you. Yes. Oops. Wow. So, security tokens can be used for a lot of, traditional assets, equity, equities, for example, but also can be used for a lot of illiquid assets or illiquid things that are illiquid, which are kind of interesting. So if we just open up the discussion to the whole world, don't worry about jurisdiction and things like this. Where do you think the initial STOs will come from in terms of what will they be for? Are they going to be for traditional equities, or are they going to be for these more exotic kind of illiquid assets or artwork or something else? So I'd love to hear your opinions.
I don't know the answer to that question, but me as a securities lawyer, I would say equities, but yeah, I don't know.
Frankly, same. Like, my viewpoint is very much based in what is the current reality in the US and the state of California. So that's what I examine a lot, and I see the impacts on the market here. I'm not an expert in the equities market in Southeast Asia. I don't know where it's gonna go. It's just probably not gonna happen here. I will mention something interesting that's been coming up is talk about collateralization in the way that it could start to impact the predatory payday lending businesses is something that's getting a lot of attention and something that our regulatory agencies actually have an appetite to see. when they talk about blockchain with me, we don't like cryptocurrency, but could you get rid of the payday lenders? Comes up a lot. Can you collateralize car title loans in a way that has much lower interest fees? So I think that's where we can start to gain some foothold here, is the thing where the industries have just been so predatory. Let's take out Western Union. I know they started doing blockchain. It's just a press release. Somebody can undercut them. Just like take out the really bad big businesses, what we need to do. Okay.
Any other question? Yeah, please do.
I'm a little bit bullish on STOs because I think it could democratize money and how we invest because we can invest in a fraction of a real estate or a fraction of a digital stock, or just a piece of the artwork, and we'll take that and also pull it so. We don't have to pay like $6,000 for one share of something, but if we want to invest in $10 of our paycheck into, an STO, I think we can still do that. I think that's exciting because, it means that even little kids, if they want to, can also invest. And I think we're still at the beginning of a stage. I think whether it's STO or ICO, they're very similar. I think STO is just really compliance. And a lot of people who are doing ICO are calling STO, and they're, seeking exemptions under Reg D or Reg S. So I think, and I've been to Asia, I went to Estonia, and I just came back from IMF World Bank, and we talk about cryptocurrency there. And, at their panel about world cooperation, how the World Bank borrows money to other countries, they didn't talk about cryptocurrency. They think that the Bitcoin is volatile. And I'm excited about STO because I think a stable coin will work. Even meeting with the delegates from South Africa, having a coin, some kind of stable coin for the whole country would be exciting. And even in the US, using cryptocurrency, for all the merchants and sending money to other people, relatives, using that one coin, I think is going to be really awesome. So I'm really excited about that space.
Curious, since you know about STOs, I mean, the fact that there's no real exchange mechanisms yet developed, is that a hindrance to getting into the space? Yeah,
so I also advise an exchange. I think they're making the infrastructure and the framework to actually make it happen, and it's going to be really, really soon. Okay. So that's that's exciting.
Any other questions on STOs or other regulatory issues, or industry regulatory climates? Got a question in the back here.
I don't know if this is a technical or too technical or a bit off topic. I'm kind of curious what the thoughts are on something like Bitcoin's Lightning Network, where people are going to be custodians of money. And so when we have something like Lightning Network, where everybody is keeping each other's money, are they going to be regulated?
All right, so California has a bill up right now called AB 1489. If you've heard of it on Twitter, it's been rudely called California's Bit License, which I think is a bit histrionic. Never accused crypto Twitter of being chill. AB 1489 deals heavily with custodianship and updating the UCC. I encourage everyone to pay close attention to it. We've worked with the author's office. They've agreed to 2-year the bill, which means they're not going to force it through this year. The author is the floor majority leader, Ian Calderon. He has some understanding of virtual currency. He helped create the working group last year. But frankly, what they did was they copy and pasted the Uniform Law Commission's suggested language for virtual currency business regulation. The Uniform Law Commission has since kind of pulled back on that and been like, okay, we've gotten a lot of complaints about the custodianship piece. We've gotten flamed aggressively, so we're going to create a states working group on this. So there's kind of two processes. 5 different states are considering this as legislation, and then the ULC is putting together a working group to sort of sort out how custodianship could work in a framework. And I think that's really where you're going to see the US moving in terms of custodianship and compliance. Yeah.
Maybe last question.
Yeah. So going broader than STOs, you know, smart contracts, I don't know if you covered this already. I'm sorry, I came in a little late. But smart contracts are not yet, in most of the world, binding as a contract, right? Many people say that they're not contracts and they're not smart either. But those are separate points. In terms of the regulatory framework, that if you would get into a blockchain transaction and a smart contract is, in essence, the contract that you agreed to, and then it executes, you know, based on that contract, is there a law yet in California that then becomes binding, or is anybody putting that up as a binding, you know, contractual agreement?
So we thought about it. Last year, AB 2658, which ended up creating the working group, initially was just supposed to be an update to UETA, the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. And in that, they were going to define blockchain with this really, really long definition, which we just put in the Vermont definition instead. And then they were going to define smart contracts, which we were like, oh no, please don't do that. That's a little premature, first of all, because as everyone keeps saying, they're dumb and they're not contracts. There's some confusion over exactly what is a smart contract, and then technology's new. So we asked the author's office to hold off on it, which he did. And also it was pointed out by most state agencies that would be considered redundant because we're already covered under the UETA. If you enter into a digital contract, it's still considered a contract. Though, if you challenge it in court, I'd like to see one of you explain it to a judge. That'd be fun. So good luck.
I think we're out of time. Michelle, are we out of time or? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all. It was a great panel, good discussion. Can we get a picture?
Thank you.
That's been aged in a bourbon cask. This cognac is the hottest cognac in the market right now, and we are completely sold out of the product, but we did pull some samples. We were able to get it from our bosses. So I would love for you guys to come by and at least sample it. Okay, great.
How do people find jobs in this space? How do they get funding in this space? Who's the gatekeeper? How do we cooperate instead of being competitive? What kind of communication skills are needed to work together? How do we set expectations? So will the next speakers please come to the stage? So because this is a small group, I encourage everyone to ask questions and participate so that we can be engaged. And I'll give the mic to the moderator.
Hi everyone, this is the Blockchain for Social Impact panel. My name is Anki, I'm a lawyer, and I'm gonna have the panelists introduce themselves so you get an idea of who's who.
So my name is Malcolm Flack. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Bbuck, and we're essentially a token economy specifically for gamers so that they can get paid to play video games.
Hey, my name is Hector Martinez. I'm with Ico, a company based out of Palo Alto. Grew up here in South City, got connected to Joseph and Kamal through various other events, so excited to be here.
I am Tarita. I am the analog representative holding it down for the common folk. I am the founder of the PMS Telethon, eradicating cramps, fibroids, and endometriosis in less than 10 years, and a co-facilitator for self-care for Black women in leadership, and a brand new one-year-old blockchain enthusiast.
So in terms of blockchain enthusiasm, I hear that everyone that's in blockchain has a story. So I'm wondering, what are your stories? How did you get involved in the blockchain space, and particularly in the social impact space?
Sure, yeah. So I actually started off, it was back in 2017. It was like shortly after college. I had this like internship in DC with this guy who is like a Goldman Sachs analyst, and he was trying to do a crypto startup. And at the time, I like just heard of Bitcoin, so I was pretty green still. And I went, and it was a super early stage startup. So basically, all we did all day was like read white papers and like trade these coins. And then I noticed like there was some serious price deltas between like GDAX and then like Binance and all these other exchanges. And so then I tried to build like an arbitrage bot to like take advantage of those and just do like trading on them. And that was kind of the first time like making a little bit of money like right there was. And I just opened my eyes to like the possibility that this stuff really enables, and then I've been down the rabbit hole ever since.
Cool. So for me, I actually started my career in accounting, and then I decided that was something that really wasn't for me. Decided to want to do something a little bit more people related, to kind of connect with folks in different space. A mentor at the time was building out a company. This was like 2017. Focusing on creating ICOs for other companies and kind of just guiding them through that process. And he gave me an opportunity to work on the sales team there, and was just like, hey man, figure this out, learn about it. And that was really my first exposure, just kind of seeing to what this technology could do. And then from there, just kind of took that experience and wanted to apply that elsewhere. And that's kind of what led me to where I'm at today.
I recently published my first book. It's called First Blood. It's a collection of stories about our first period. And I was at a conference last year, and it was lunch. And during the lunch break, I was selling a copy of my book to another woman who was at the conference. And as lunch ended, they started building the breakout session seating around us. And the breakout session was blockchain. And it was awkward to leave. So we stayed and sat down and sat through the session, and I was hooked. My degree is in agricultural economics, and I studied to trade on the Merc in Chicago. So I understand markets, I understand economies, I understand all of the conversation, and I had no idea that this existed. And so I listened and listened to all of the panelists, to all of the people in the audience, and the more I listened, the more I got sucked in. And as they asked for Q&A, I raised my hand, and I gave a recap of what I understood to be going on. And they said, yeah, that's exactly it. And so my question was, wow, who's sharing this with folks in the hood? You know, how come Tyrone doesn't have a Bitcoin? Like, why don't we have an East 14th dollar? And so it started a whole series of questions in my head that led me a year later to this panel.
That's interesting that you're saying that people in the hood don't know about this. How do you think that's going to change? How would you let more people know about this technology and actually make use of it in a way that's good for social impact?
You know what, I sit with that. A lot of things are word of mouth, so I started there with sharing with, you know, like the old shampoo commercial. You tell two friends, they tell two friends, so on and so on. I think that through educational channels, I've been listening a lot today. I listened about the training. You talked, I think, earlier about the training at Berkeley and the Den, and I have followed very closely Black Girls Code. There's Year Up, a lot of different programming, and I think that those are some good channels to start to get the word, hack the hood. There's a lot, especially here in Oakland, which is very rich, but I worry about that, frankly, because we all know there's a huge diversity issue in tech in general. So if there's a diversity issue in tech, and then if you pare down this large category we have of people of color, for me, and I just look at Black participants, the playing field is really not level. The representation really is not there. So I think that that's a great question. I don't have a complete answer to, but I think it's one that we need to be able to answer. I think we don't have the answer on the funding front. I think we don't have the answer on the participation front, but what we have is we're the original hustlers. You know, we're the original entrepreneurs. We're the original creators. So given the access and the information, the end game is just amazing. It could be an amazing outcome.
Yeah, definitely. I think one piece that's super interesting to me is just like exposure and education. Like I think just kind of when talking to friends, it's like bringing up Bitcoin or bringing up blockchain, and people are like, "Oh, what's that?" And it's just like it gives you an opportunity to share what you know with people, and it gives you a chance for more people to get involved. Like you mentioned, just kind of sharing it with a friend. So yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, right, it's more about kind of bringing this technology directly towards people, but not necessarily, you know, giving them like Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these things. I think it's about making a participation system so that anyone can join it and be rewarded no differently than someone who, you know, participated 3 or 4 years ago. Otherwise, they join a system where there's already like it's heavily consolidated, and they can't possibly come out on top because there's just too much entrenchment. And so I think, for instance, gaming is something that appeals to, you know, at least 2.1 billion people like on Earth. Everyone plays games. So I mean, clearly I'm a little biased, but I think that could be a good distribution method to kind of reach people who don't necessarily want to spend the time reading a white paper, and they just want to see like real productivity or functionality in their lives that wasn't there before, like a new technology should be able to do for them. So I feel like that would be a good distribution way, and I'm sure there's several others as well.
I think when we're looking at startup funding, that's another path. What would that look like if, you know, Caper Center was funding startups in Bitcoins? I mean, so definitely it's a space where we've got to get creative. I think the onesie twosie like we're doing, the each one tell one, is only going to get us so far so fast. And we're at risk of the same thing we're seeing now where a small percentage holds a large percentage of the wealth. And we heard those stats earlier today. And so definitely, but we also heard, I think Norman said on the earlier panel, like right now where we are is equivalent to dial-up. So we're at such a stage of infancy that it's possible to shift this a whole number of ways.
Are you, oh, sorry, are we done? Okay. Are you aware of any projects in particular that are social impact driven blockchain projects that the audience should know about? Oh, I was asking if the panelists knew of any blockchain specific projects that benefit social impact that the audience should know about.
Yeah, so I think one, I haven't read too much onto it, but I know Tezos, for instance, and they're based out of Paris. But they do like a pretty cool like governance structure, and they're trying to do, literally governance on the blockchain. And so that could obviously impact society like in that way. I feel like it's tricky though, because there's a fine line between doing something purely from like a nonprofit perspective, for maybe like not represented populations of people versus, just doing something and helping everybody like in aggregate with each other. And so I feel like in that regard, I don't know. Tezos is probably the biggest one I know of, honestly, at this point. UBI? Okay. I've not heard of that one, but yeah, that could be one too, so yeah. Oh, and then I would say ours too, B-Buck. Yeah, that's a good one too, so.
I think like more from a community-driven approach, like one place that I learned a lot from is the Starfish Mission up in the city, which is a great place to just educate yourself on everything from like blockchain 101 to just connecting to other people in the space to just learning from each other. Because I think that a lot of this stuff is accessible to a certain point where you go to a meetup or you go to some sort of event and people are willing to talk to you about it. At least that's been my experience. And even if that's not the case, right, sometimes it just takes seeing somebody like you and somebody that you can relate to, and then that person is the person that drives you forward. So I really like what that team over there is doing.
No.
Was there anything else you wanted to add about your perspective on social impact and the blockchain?
Yeah, so I feel like at least the opportunity to impact society with it is basically monetizing everything that you're doing online more equitably than you're being compensated for now. So for instance, like Facebook, where they're just taking all of your data and then just selling it. I feel like now, as an individual, you can contribute to a new social site or something like that. And you're not gonna make enough to buy a Lambo or anything, but you might make enough to buy some bread or just basic income from that. And if obviously the more followers and kind of contribution you make to the network, the more you get rewarded for it. So I feel like in that aspect, there's a lot that could be done there.
So in that sense, it seems that everyone has value and everyone can tap into their own inherent value.
I understand that, especially since the regulations are changing and the access in the U.S. is changing, there's a lot of focus overseas. And so there's a lot of work being done to have greater social impact and leverage this technology overseas as opposed to here. So I don't have specifics, but I understand that's the shift that's happening in the landscape.
And why do you think this is happening overseas versus in the U.S.? Is it because of the regulations?
I think it's because of the regulations, and I think it's because if you didn't get in early, you're sort of in a little bit of a holding pattern if you're U.S. bound. So when we talk about diversifying, especially if we talk about diversifying across class, then you're looking at who even has access to get outside of the country and get in the game.
So just a few points. You know, I think blockchain is new enough that anyone can enter and learn it. You know, I think we're still in the really early stage. So if there's a developer up there who doesn't know how to code and wants to learn how to code and wants to create, you know, learn Solidity and learn how to code with the blockchain, I think it's completely possible. You know, I think there's a lot of opportunities in the US, especially when enterprises are talking about the blockchain. And, you know, at the World Bank, IMF, you know, people are talking about cryptocurrency. So I think, you know, the banks are using it, Microsoft and a lot of enterprises are moving into it. And I think a lot of the people in corporations don't know about blockchain, you know, and that's why they're so slow in adoption, you know, because then there's a lot of job opportunities because of that. So I think even in the US, you know, I think a lot of people do ICO or pre-sales outside of the US because of regulation, you know, but I think as an industry, as a technology, I think there's still a lot of opportunities here in the US. You know, and I think with that opportunity and cryptocurrency, I think it has opportunities to create diversity and inclusion, you know, or co-create, because then we all work together to create inclusion.
I think the opportunity is there. I also was very interested in the conversation with the jobs panel earlier today and looking at where the job growth is and what part that will play in educating diverse participants and diverse audiences as people start to do this as part of their day job. Then it'll spread as well, the opportunity and the information and the education.
Yeah, I think we're definitely starting to see a lot more enterprise adoption. I mean, even with like Facebook Coin coming out, JP Morgan, and clearly they're going to have benefits from that. I think for people to go out and learn how to code and everything like that, specifically for blockchain, you know, it's certainly possible, but I think it's more of a question of what are they going to build? Because right now it's like you just build another chain that's going to facilitate all these amazing use cases. You know, the decentralized Uber and the Airbnbs and stuff. But really, like, if you're only getting a very small cost efficiency from that, then is it worth building? You could certainly raise $30 million doing it, but maybe, you know, that's not, I don't know, going to necessarily bring this huge impact that it was supposed to. I feel like it's really kind of, there needs to be more kind of creative business models around the space. And figuring out how exactly are you bringing value, or at least taking it from the real world and putting it in the digital one. So, i.e., like solving the Oracle problem or something like that, kind of like Agra did. There's a couple other projects out there. I think that could be also very big for society. But yeah, I mean, personally, I'm much more interested in kind of the new use cases that come from this, and not so much focus on the enterprise improvements that come from it. Although there's going to be plenty of those.
Was there anything else you wanted to add before we open it up to the audience for questions?
There's a lot of chairs in here.
Does anyone have questions they want to ask the panelists?
I do.
Thanks. One of the projects that have potentially very big social impact, especially for disadvantaged communities here in the US, is the one that Daisy Osim is working on. It's a wellness, mental health, and there is value in solving the problem of mental health here in the US, and I think she's into something big. She's raising some money in order to do the pilot for that. And I think that would be a very big, important use case of social impact that is done here in Auckland. And there are many. The reason why I believe people are trying outside rather than here is because here the politicians are too bought out to allow for the changes that need to be put in place. Like, for example, one immediate application that I see would be easy to deploy is contract management, contract transparency in the public sector. And I've talked with a number of entrepreneurs that are working on solutions in that space, but blockchain is not allowed as a legally allowed system to control that, precisely because it would be too public and too transparent, and the politicians wouldn't allow for that. So, that's one reason why it's easier outside, where the politicians are not as bought out as here in the US.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, kind of the health industry, I think insurance, real estate, all these things, even, Hashgraph touched on it a bit, right? Just kind of disintermediating current industries. But I feel like the current struggle with them, at least in terms of real estate, is how you differentiate between like rent collections and then also ownership over that specific property. And if you do issue dividends and things like that, it also has to be kind of stable. So I know there's several companies like BrickBlock and things like that trying to solve it, but really like the token model behind those things definitely has a lot of work to go behind. And I know that a lot of businesses doing that have a huge incentive to just do an ICO or something like that, which is good for raising funds, but bad for providing some kind of stability to that token and to have a viable use case. But yeah, I agree with you. Like all those things in theory will be huge. It's just I'm also looking for projects like that could pull it off well.
So I have a question for each one of you.
Daisy was one of the panelists at that circle I sat in, that first circle. And we work in that same space. I do a lot in women's health and wellness and empowerment. So it's been fascinating to watch her on this journey and try and puzzle this through. And I do think that you're right. I think it's gonna lead somewhere, and I think it's gonna set a pattern that other people will be able to follow. And it'll be in this particular political landscape that we're in. It's really fascinating because new problems are being created every day, and so she's looking at how do I create the matching solution for that problem. So
my question is for each one of the speaker is. Diversity is very complex, so there is class, there is gender, there's sex orientation, and then there is race. And sometimes these two overlap. So in each one of your organization, how have you tried to work on inclusiveness and social impact within your company? So if you're a man, do you try to have more diversity in your team, in your advisor? If you're an organization, how do you cross-promote with other groups and communities?
Definitely. So for me, I'm also part of a group called Latinos in Finance, which is an organization here in the Bay Area that focuses on, Hernan is also part of Latinos in Finance. And so the whole goal of the organization is to really create opportunities for students to get more of an understanding on the finance industry and kind of set them up with more opportunities in the space, whether it's through a scholarship program, whether it's through a mentorship program. And every year we have what's called the Latinos in Finance Bootcamp, where we bring students from all the campuses in the Bay Area, professionals to kind of connect them to, but also speakers that can share their story as to how they guided and navigated their own story and their own journey. And the thing that I find interesting now is that as we're all learning about finance and traditional companies and kind of these banks that, ideally to students sound really good, there's this whole new industry emerging, blockchain and crypto, where a lot more people are starting to get into, right? Like there's a lot of people from bigger banks and big companies that are joining smaller crypto firms. And so it's kind of the beginning of a transition. And so my role is really just trying to get us to understand that, when we're speaking about Latinos in finance, there's also like crypto and blockchain that's emerging. And what are we doing to kind of educate and provide opportunities for all students and all Latinos in the space? In terms of collaborating, we've worked with K-Changes in the past around just connecting our networks and providing an avenue for people to connect, right? So that's some of the stuff we're up to there.
Yeah, I think for us, in terms of intersectionality is obviously a pretty complicated thing. But we've made a serious point to make sure that our core team members are people of color, and then also like women as advisors. And the biggest way we do that is honestly through just kind of events such as this, like conferences, meetups, mutual introductions, things like that. And I do think it is very important because especially in kind of this Wild West period of crypto that we're in, it is going to take kind of a lot of creativity to navigate some of the issues that are in front of us. And so, yeah, it's an important problem, and we definitely do what we can to, solve it, or at least help it.
I started doing diversity consulting in 1988. And in 1988, it was about diversity was not all those things you listed. Diversity was black people. And it was about getting black people in senior level positions in companies, because companies were trying to diversify by bringing people in at the bottom and moving them up and failing. And we were able to show how diversity impacted the bottom line, impacted their finances, and why it was a smarter strategic move to bring people in at the top and then allow them to attract similar, because like attracts like, and it's a fact of how we were recruiting and how we were moving through life. And so fast forward 1,000 years, and now here we are back in this diversity conversation, and we're using words like inclusion, and we're using words like equity. So I work with 3 different programs: the Self-Care for Black Women in Leadership, where we're dealing with these black female leaders who are dealing with anti-blackness in their organizations as they're trying to lead for change. And we're putting them in homogenous space with other black female leaders so that they can feel the feelings, talk truthfully about what their experience is, find community and find power in that, heal themselves, and then go into the intersection, and then go in and deal with all of the other layers of who they are. And we do it with a team of black female facilitators who are diverse within that space. So they are gay, straight, and bi. They are intergenerational. They are bringing in trans teachers. They're bringing in wisdom from all of the different spaces. So that's one way I deal with it in that space. The rest of my work deals with, starts from this female health and wellness and empowerment model. And so my book that I wrote First Blood because I found that our menstrual cycles, interestingly enough, is the one thing that unites all women. And my premise was, there's no woman that could come in the bathroom that I wouldn't give a tampon to if she needed one. Didn't matter if I agreed with her politics, her race, her age, her anything. And so I started in that place. And then the men came in and told me about their wives and their daughters and their mothers. So I picked a point in life that is filled with shame, that doesn't have open, transparent, honest, vulnerable conversation, but actually impacts every living being on the earth. And I started working from that space. And I found that when you find that common ground and you work from common ground, then you can talk about all sorts of things, because the 2 most difficult things that we have to talk about in our culture, in this particular culture we're in, is sex and money. And so if I can get them to talk about bodies and health, then we can get into a conversation about other uncomfortable spaces like money, and we can bring parity in those spaces. So how I do it is using equity. Who's at the table? Who's having the conversation? So what I liked about Blockchain for All is here was Joseph and Kamal saying, hey, we're going to be 2 black men at the table. What I like about working with Daisy is young, she's Nigerian, she's fierce, and she's fearless to speak her voice into the room. And so those are the ways that I try and have that social impact around all of the categories of diversity. Is we've just got to get past the shame factor, and we've got to get to a space where we're having honest conversation. Right now, cryptocurrency, blockchain, Bitcoin, it's a rich game, or it's a tech game. And there's not too many other folks that are playing in that field, and yet it should be accessible to all. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. And can we have an amen to that? Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? Michelle,
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My name is Melanie Wofford. I'm with the San Francisco Foundation. I currently work with a cohort of young people in the technology industry. Part of the answer to my question you did just answer, but I wanted you to speak a little bit more to some intentional steps for outreach and exposure to this information. What are some of the things that you need or opportunities that we can continue to do, like these conferences? But I'd like to see conferences, full of the young people who need the information. What are some of the ways that you think, I guess from a foundational standpoint, we can help to do this? I actually came here because one of the young people that I am trying to get in my pipeline and get funding was on one of these panels here. So I guess my question is, again, about outreach, working together intentionally, like pipelines within the pipeline, and then advice that you would give to people like on the funder side in terms of what we can do to help support getting that information and access directly to the young people and consumers we're trying to meet.
I think we definitely need more conferences like this. I was really excited that one of the partners was KBLX and that it was being aired over the radio into communities to come and participate. I felt like that was huge. I felt like Joseph and Kamal could use a whole bunch more support administratively and getting funding.
Yes.
Right, getting funding for the operational and administrative aspects of any initiative is like pulling hairs. So unrestricted funds is the nonprofit lingo, right? We need some unrestricted funds, and then I don't know. I mean, we got a PR expert in the room. Maybe we need more PR around this. But those are some of my initial thoughts. Oh, and then there's a guy. So this is what I heard, right? Because y'all know I'm the low tech on the panel. But there's a guy who started Acorn Coin. So that is here apparently in Oakland. That's a black man who's trying to get that off the ground. So hearing about people like that and being able to follow their stories, and so maybe some sort of online clearinghouse where we can swap stories, but not in the developer circles, just in the lay people circles, maybe another way.
So I have the group Hashes on Block on Facebook. You guys can join. And I basically put in all kinds of news on cryptocurrency and blockchain. So news including SEC updates, like on the spot, and then different industry on different coins, and then just whatever events are coming. So and also I think Hats Walk is also another group that I have on Telegram that you can join. And it provides information to people, and I think there are just different people in the community. A lot of them are my friends that are willing to help.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah,
I also have a radio show, and Laptop Radio is my show. So if you go to YouTube and look at Laptop Radio, I have interviewed friends on Bitcoin and Blockchain 101. So you can really listen to my show. Yeah, like a laptop radio on YouTube. I usually start from the ground up and then get a little bit more advanced later on when I interview people. So that is just more inclusive, so different levels of people can participate.
Yeah, I think, like me personally, I want to be able to hire people and build something that people all over the world are using on a massive scale. Like that's really important to me. And I know that my time is split though between building a product, raising funds, hiring people, developing like the business plan further, like partnerships, like there's a whole lot of things going on. And so the biggest thing for us would just be like, I don't know, access to like grants or certain things like that. For instance, I met someone the other day that introduced us to like the NSF grant, and that was like kind of cool. I had no idea about that before. So that's like one aspect of it, and then I think, just keeping an eye open, like conferences like this, but maybe more geared towards like the technical talks or marketing or something like that would also be big, because you could just kind of have a natural like conversations with other people in the industry. Those are all things that would help. But it's rough, right? Because it's like if you do spend all of your time on one particular issue, right, you're not really going to be able to build something or keep up with the competition because your focus is elsewhere. And so that's, anything to kind of relieve that stress a little bit so we can like focus on building something great while also being able to include other people with various backgrounds is like, I think that would be key.
I think one thing that I used early on was a Telegram. Telegram was, it's a messaging app that a lot of people in the crypto space got friendly with and just got familiar with. And there's a lot of groups that are on there just educating people on a lot of things, and just kind of different newsletters as well, right? You see an event in the city, you see an event in the East Bay, and you check out one event, and you can navigate that crowd and kind of communicate with organizers, and then from there you get introduced to other people in the space, right? That's one thing that I did early on.
Okay, just one add-on, because it kind of brought a point, is talk about the bridge, if there is any, with you and your work in terms of advocacy. Because there's all of these things. I understand that you want to do your work, and then you got the fundraising, and you got the politics, you got the advocacy, movement building, all the other stuff. But are you currently, co-laboring or collaborating with organizations that may be focused specifically on advocacy and movement building? And if not, that's just kind of, I'm throwing that out there because all of this stuff has to be happening at the same time. So I just kind of want to hear some comments about that. And then
I know. I don't know. Yeah, there's various Telegram groups. Like Women in Blockchain is one. That I went and joined in like communicating with different women, like especially women of color within there. There's another lady based out of Los Angeles, and she's been like a product marketer at Google for many, many years. And it would be awesome to add her onto the team, but like she's pretty expensive. So it would be cool to like be able to bring her on at some point in the future. I think in terms of organizations, it's definitely something, I don't know, maybe we could take and join more organizations and kind of do that at the same time. I just know like I said, it is pretty packed. I don't know. I try to go to like as many blockchain events as I can, and also, all that's, so, but that's kind of where we're at with it, so.
I have a good friend that's here today, and I think you should definitely meet Jesse Martinez. He's, I think it'd be great, Jesse, if you want to share a little bit of kind of what you're up to with Career Force and Latino Startup Alliance, because I think that ties directly into kind of connecting different communities.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being part of this panel this evening, especially on a Friday. So Jesse Martinez, and I've been in San Francisco over 20 years, working on startup number 4. I'm also a founder of Latinos in Blockchain and Crypto. So small community, but again, we got to put it out there to the universe and bring people together. So we know that they exist, and so how do we invite people from around the world to participate? In addition, to your earlier question about what can we do from a funder perspective, these conferences are awesome, bringing community together, but we also need to have these conversations on stage. So think about like doing a keynote luncheon at the major blockchain conferences and summits so that the rest of society can hear these stories, hear these conversations, and allow people to take action and be involved, right? And then the second thing is, how about being able to sponsor passes, conference passes for youth, so that they can attend these very expensive conferences and summits? And so, thank you.
Any other questions?
So what I'm doing is, so we've launched self-care for Black women in leadership, and we're bringing women through this. So we're on our third cohort. So right now we have about 50 women, and we're sharing information. So that's how I learned about this Black cryptocurrency initiative. And what we're hoping to do with these women is leverage the talents and the information as a group. So one of the things that we noticed around self-care is how much money we're spending to anesthetize ourselves or to, escape our lives and the stress as opposed to care for ourselves. And just looking at our collective wealth. So if we can take that collective wealth and apply it in a space like this, that's kind of my vision around how all of these things come together. I would also like to see a menstrual coin because I'm dealing with all things related to our blood. And so what does that look like in terms of addressing menstrual health issues globally? And so that's my vision on crossing the streams.
Yeah, I would say another thing to maybe add to that would be like, if you specifically have communities that are dedicated to certain like minority groups that are talking specifically about blockchain, they're looking for speakers and things like that, and there's many of those that people can just join. That would help a lot with like recruitment and everything, right? Because right now to get technical talent, especially in the Bay Area with crazy salaries and things like that, is hard enough. But the more you kind of like cut that down, it gets harder and harder to do. So you just having like a central place where you can access that kind of talent would be huge for I know like many companies in the space for sure. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. All right. So.
Hey guys. Before we. All right. I want to thank everybody for being a part of Blockchain for All success this time or today, right? And I have to do some mentions. We're going to start with The Den. Thank you, The Den, for their recording, their interviews, all their contributions, but definitely Hedera Hashgraph, Digital Reserve, the Kapoor Center. Thank you, Latinos in Finance, for being our media partner. Thank you, Cage Chain, for your contributions to this event. Thank you, Michelle. How did Michelle do, huh? Did Michelle do good, guys? Can we give Michelle a round of applause for her excellent emceeing skills? I didn't know Michelle was so fantastic. Anki, thank you. Malcolm, thank you. Hector, thank you. Tarita, thank you. We wrapped upstairs, so that's why you hear all the DJ noise and all the music going on. And if you guys want to stick around, I encourage you to stick around. I'm not sure if they're still doing some tastings back there, but Martell, thank you, Martell, for contributing some fine tastes for my taste buds. Smooth brand there. I really enjoyed tasting the Martell. And I just want to, just show my extreme appreciation for everyone coming and being part of Blockchain for All. We look forward to this being a even bigger success going forward, and look forward to hearing more and seeing all the pictures and media and posts about how today went, because you all contributed, and any way we can grow the blockchain community by putting together showcases like this, that's exactly what we're here to do. So I absolutely want to thank Jeffrey's Inner Circle, Mr. Jeffrey Pete. Thank you for making your venue available. Hopefully we can give it back to you better than you gave it to us. So thank you so much. Is there any questions? Is there any questions or anything I can address before we close down? All right. Well, with that, thank you all for coming. The bar is open here or upstairs. Hang out, get some Martell, and thank you all for coming out to Blockchain for All. Thank you so much.